In times of universal deceit, truth is the only rebellion left. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion. Today's show is going to be a critique of Gentner Drummond, the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, who's also a candidate right now as we speak for the Republican nomination to become governor of the state of Oklahoma. Again, Oklahoma, the reddest of red states. We haven't had one county in Oklahoma vote blue in the past 5 presidential elections. Not one county. The entire state has been red. So why is this important to anybody that doesn't live in Oklahoma? Because what happens in Oklahoma isn't going to stay in Oklahoma. These particular issues, these discussions of religious freedom, the First Amendment, separation of church and state, are not going to be just resident in the state in which the debate is taking place. This particular case, where Gentner Drummond is suing to stop the parents of Oklahoma from choosing to use their tax dollars, their money. You need to remember, the government has no money. Tax dollars are not government money. Tax dollars are your money. And you should have a say in how those dollars are used. Now, many states have decided that the money can follow the parent when it comes to school choice. That if your local school is unsatisfactory, it's performing poorly, the graduates of your local school can't read or write or do math at basic grade level, if your school is failing in teaching American civics, in other words, that America is exceptional rather than evil, if your school is failing in teaching the basics of science, that biology is real, not a postmodern construct, not a fabrication, not the consequence of a delusional male's fantasies. If your school is failing in these areas and spending more time in data collection, in social emotional learning, and in social engineering, if your school is talking more about DEI and LGBTQIA rather than the basic ABCs of how to read and write and count, if your school is failing in these areas and you want to choose a different school that will teach your kid the basics of reading and writing and arithmetic, that science is real, that a male and a female is a fact, not a fantasy, and that America is good, not bad, and maybe even add a little bit about teaching virtue rather than vice. If you want to find a school that does that and send your kids to that school, you should have the right to do so. Who in their right mind would disagree with anything I just said? Well, Gentner Drummond, the Republican Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma, and a candidate for the state's governor right now, is suing all the way to the Supreme Court to stop you as a parent from doing everything I just said. Why? Because of separation of church and state. And that you don't have the right to choose a school if that school is grounded in a Judeo-Christian ethic. In this case, St. Isidore's charter school, which has been approved by a board in the state of Oklahoma, St. Isidore's is unacceptable because it's a Catholic school. Now, they admit anybody, you don't have to be Catholic to go. Nobody's forcing anybody to go to the school. It's a charter school. Everyone who attends there goes there by choice, period. Nobody is trying to indoctrinate anybody in religion. It's a choice of the parent that they think this school is better. I could choose it. I'm not Catholic, but if it's the best school in my area, I should be able to choose to send my kid there. Yes, with tax dollars, because the tax dollars came from me. Okay? This case is being heard in the Supreme Court right now, the Supreme Court of the United States. Why? Because Gentner Drummond is not supporting school choice and religious freedom. He's standing against school choice and against religious freedom, and he's doing it under the guise, the auspices, the pretension of the separation of church and state, the wall of separation. Before we get into this any further, I want to remind you that the sponsor of the rebellion is a ministry called equippingthepersecuted.org, equippingthepersecuted.org. This is a ministry that reaches out and provides help and services, supplies, education, orphanages to Christians who are being persecuted in Nigeria. Over 90% of the persecution that's taking place worldwide right now against the church, against Christians, is taking place in Nigeria. People are being butchered for their faith. And if you want to help stop this, give your tax-deductible gift to equippingthepersecuted.org. Not only will your gift go to help with general needs, health and education, housing, etc., it also goes to help train the villagers, the residents in these communities in Nigeria that are suffering attacks from terrorists. It teaches these people, equippingthepersecuted.org teaches these people how to secure their communities, better security measures, alarm systems, warning systems, mutual accountability between villages to warn people before the butchery starts happening. They try to stop it. You need to support equippingthepersecuted.org with your tax-deductible gift today. All right, back to the show. All right, this is installment 2.0, as I've inferred. I've already talked about Gentner Drummond in a previous episode. You need to go back and listen to that episode as the context of everything I'm saying. A brief overview of everything I've already discussed is this. When people use the argument of separation of church and state, they need to understand the context of what's being said. Briefly, and I've given a speech to the Trump administration's Department of Health and Human Services and Office of Civil Rights on this issue. They invited me to Washington, D.C. when they started, back in the first Trump administration, the Special Division of Religious Freedom within the OCR and HHS. I was invited to be one of the speakers at that ceremony. And at that ceremony, I reminded everybody, the liberal press included, which was there, that the separation of church and state, this wall, it's not constitutional, it's not in any of our seminal documents, it's not in the Federalist Papers, it's not in the Constitution, it's not in the Declaration of Independence. So where did this concept of a wall come from? Well, you all know. It came from Thomas Jefferson when he was elected to be the third president of the United States. He had some nervous Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, who were asking him what his position was in terms of protecting the church from an overbearing state. And Jefferson replied, and basically in the Piper paraphrase said this: you don't need to worry about it. We've got the First Amendment. It was written by James Madison 11 years ago, and I, as your chief magistrate, am bound to give Christianity sanction. He said that. And then he said, look, there is a wall of separation. There's a wall of separation. Congress shall make no wall establishing religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Congress has no business meddling into how you practice your faith or how you teach your kids about your faith or perpetuate the ideas of your faith, your Christianity, or any other faith in your progeny, the minds and souls of your children. Jefferson was being clear. The wall is there, yes. It's called the First Amendment. But it's a wall that is a fortress to protect you from an overbearing government. It's not a wall of a prison to restrain you, to confine you, to jail you, and to keep you out of the public square. That isn't at all what Jefferson was saying. He was saying the exact opposite. In other words, yeah, there's a metaphorical wall. That's Jefferson's language, not constitutional, not Declaration of Independence, not Federalist Papers. It's in a private letter to the Danbury Baptists where he says, there's a wall, there's a barrier, there's a fence to protect you from me, to protect you from Congress, to protect you from the government, to protect you from a king, because we have no business meddling in the affairs of the church. It's your business. You decide. And then he made it clear. He didn't think religion was supposed to be expunged from the public square. He said, as your chief magistrate, that's his language. I'm quoting him. As your chief magistrate, I am bound to give Christianity sanction. He didn't say Islam. He didn't say the Baha'i faith. He didn't say shamanism. He said Christianity. Why? His language, because it is the best religion given to man. And as your chief magistrate, I am bound to give it sanction. Does it sound like he thinks Christianity should be left out of the public schools or any public discussion for that matter? No, period. And I go in further in my previous episode, which you need to listen to if you want to get all the details. I quote James Madison. He wrote the First Amendment. Already quoted that. John Adams. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Pretty clear. Our Constitution is grounded, grown, rooted in the concept of Christian morality. And without that, it's not adequate to govern any people. Without the moral assumptions of a Judeo-Christian ethic, of a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview, our Constitution is worthless. That's what That's what John Adams was saying. Then you have a chief, or not a chief justice, a justice on the Supreme Court at the time Oklahoma was founded. Now, why does that matter? Even if you're not in Oklahoma, this matters. Context is always king. So what was the Supreme Court saying? What were some of the rulings that were taking place in the late 1800s, early 1900s when Oklahoma became a state? Well, Justice Brewer said that we are a Christian nation. This is irrefutable. It's replete. It's everywhere in our documents, in our understanding. In the soil out of which our constitutional republic grows is the assumption that we are a Christian nation. He said it, period. Can you imagine our Supreme Court saying that today? Why? Not because it's not true. It's because they've abandoned that wisdom and that historical fact. Not all of them, but the liberals surely have. And don't you have to ask yourself a question? Why would a Republican attorney general who wants to be a Republican governor of the reddest of red states find himself agreeing with Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan and Justice Ketanji, whatever her name is, Jackson Brown? The three most liberal justices agree with Gentner Drummond, and Gentner Drummond agrees with them on this issue. How can you claim to be conservative Republican, conservative Christian, conservative respecter of separation of church and state and of religious freedom and the right for the church to do what it wants to do and Christians to do what they want to do in terms of educating their children? How can you claim to agree with the founding fathers, James Madison, John Adams, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Justice Brewer, Teddy Roosevelt? Teddy Roosevelt comes along as president at the time of our founding, and he says that if you remove the teachings of the Bible from the public square, we're going to have hell to pay. Again, my paraphrase, but that's what Teddy Roosevelt is saying. Context is king. But Gentner Drummond comes along as our candidate for the governor of the state of Oklahoma, and he's basically a poster child for what's going to take place in your other states if you don't live here. And he's using this age-old, worn-out, progressive liberal argument that we have to have the separation of church and state. Because what's going to happen if we allow Christianity to be expressed or taught or critiqued with tax dollars? Oh, my land. Oh, my land. We'll all go to hell in a handbasket and we'll lose our religious freedom in the United States. Well, this is not true. That's not true. And what I'm going to cover right now are some facts. Some facts. And what I'm sharing with you right now is, like I said, the Alliance Defending Freedom agrees with this. The Becket Fund, another legal organization that represents religious freedom, they agree with what I'm saying. First Liberty Institute, again, another organization that has gone all the way to the Supreme Court and arguing on behalf of people that want their religious freedom protected. They agree with what I'm saying right now. I'm not making this stuff up. So what we need to understand is that, and by the way, Alliance Defending Freedom represented me, Oklahoma Wesleyan University, when I was president there, when we sued the Obama administration for trying to force abortifacient drugs on us in our healthcare package. They were likewise trying to force the Little Sisters of the Poor, a Catholic order of nuns in Colorado, to include abortifacient drugs in their healthcare. How crazy is that? They're nuns, they're celibate, they don't have sex, they don't need any contraception, let alone that which induces abortion, and they're Catholic, they don't believe in killing babies. But yet the Obama administration is saying your religion doesn't matter, you've got to do this anyway. And at Oklahoma Wesleyan, we're pro-life, we don't hire anybody that's not, at least we didn't when I was there. And we said, no, we agree with the Little Sisters. So we were co-litigants suing to stop the federal government from breaching that wall, entering the church and telling us what to do. Because again, the wall isn't there as a prison to confine us. It's there as a fortress to protect us. Very big difference. Walls can be very nefarious and bad, okay? Or they can be very good. The wall around Auschwitz was a bad thing. The Berlin Wall during the Cold War was a bad thing because it was keeping the goodness in and stopping it from permeating culture. It was persecuting people rather than protecting people. This wall of separation that Gentner Drummond and other liberals, like the three liberals on the Supreme Court, are arguing for right now is a wall that's being used to bludgeon you into submission. It's not being used to protect you. They're constructing it as a prison to stop the church from engaging in ideas, debate. Oh, my land, education. You can't have the church involved in education, and if the education is in a public school, oh, my land. Vacuums are always filled, people. If you take Christianity out of the equation in any educational discussion, that vacuum that's created as the result of taking religion out is going to be replaced by something. And don't be mistaken. If it's replaced by socialism, socialism is a religion. If it's replaced by communism, communism is a religion. If it's replaced by atheism, atheism. It's got the word theism in it. It is a perspective, a view, an ideology. It is a religion. They've drawn conclusions and they're making an argument about the existence of God or not, your responsibility to God or not, morality or the lack thereof. They're making very specific decisions and drawing very specific conclusions on the basis of their view of theism. The isms of our day all have a religious assumption. There is no such thing as a morally neutral view. There is no such thing as a totally vacuous worldview that has no religious assumption. It doesn't exist. Back to the point. Excluding religious groups from charter school programs such as St. Isidore's because of an outdated progressive legal theory is something that the Supreme Court has already rejected. Did you know that? The only reason St. Isidore's contract was canceled by the Supreme Court of Oklahoma, a bunch of liberals who ruled against the state's board that approved St. Isidore's. The state board said, yeah, St. Isidore's is a charter school. People can choose to send their kids there or not choose to send their kids there because the enrollment is entirely of school choice, parental choice. Parents should be able to choose it regardless of any bias that others might have against Christianity. And even if you're not a Christian, if you're not a Catholic, if this is what you want for your kid, you should have the opportunity to send your kid there. And St. Isidore's doesn't stop you. They welcome all comers that want to choose this particular education for their kids. Okay. And the only reason that contract that the board gave them was canceled by the liberal Supreme Court, Oklahoma Supreme Court, was because St. Isidore's is a religious school. It met all the criteria of a charter school. Canceling a charter school with a private canceling a charter school contract, I should say. Canceling a charter school contract with a private organization such as St. Isidore's solely because it will run a faith-based school is religious discrimination. They're being discriminated against simply because they're admitting that they are a religion rather than denying it on the basis of socialism, communism, or atheism, or the nihilism that this vacuous argument of radical separation of church and state that Gentner Drummond embraces assumes. I'm going to read this again. Canceling a charter school contract with a private organization solely because it will run that school on a faith-based basis or assumption is religious discrimination against that organization and against that school. Gentner Drummond is asking for a license to discriminate against religious schools. That's what he's doing. He wants to discriminate against religious schools and say, you can't accept the same dollars that a non-religious school would accept. Okay? Does that make sense to you? For Oklahoma to be neutral toward religion, it must allow all qualified applicants to operate charter schools, including qualified religious groups. You can have qualifications, in other words, graduation rates, reading, writing, and math proficiency scores. Are you teaching American civics in a positive way rather than teaching that America is evil? Are you teaching that biology is real and not a fabrication? You can set up those expectations. The board in Oklahoma has done so. And if the applicant meets those qualifications, it doesn't matter what their religion is. It doesn't matter. You can't discriminate against them simply because they're religious. Does that make sense to you? Private organizations should be allowed to qualify for government contracts if they meet the criteria to do the job. These contracts can't be canceled just because the applicants are religious. And doing so is discrimination against them, pure and simple. This case that Gentner Drummond is pushing from the wrong side, this case does not, I want you to hear me on this, it does not threaten the separation of church and state. This case seeks to end religious discrimination. And the irony is in his Orwellian way, where doublespeak, saying things that are true that aren't true, and portraying things as good that aren't good, turning definitions upside down and on their end. In this Orwellian way of doublespeak, Gentner Drummond is out there saying that he's fighting for religious freedom, that he's fighting for religious liberty. And your right to be Christian or Jewish or Hindu without oppression in the United States, without anybody discriminating against your right to act and teach and talk and educate your children accordingly. He's saying that he's on your side, and he's not. He's on the opposite side of the fence. Again, this case does not threaten the separation of church and state. This case seeks to end religious discrimination. The state cannot create a benefit. It cannot create a benefit that welcomes all private groups except those that are religious. Drummond is arguing for license to discriminate against religion. But the First Amendment forbids it. Now, why can't the state create a benefit that financially advantages secular groups but not religious groups? Because the Supreme Court of the United States, with Justice John Roberts writing in the majority, has already ruled against it. They've said you can't do this. They've already ruled against this. Okay? Here is some of what Roberts has said previously. States are not required to subsidize private education. But then Justice Roberts goes on and explains that in his opinion, for the majority at the time, I might add, that if they do opt to do so, if states do opt to subsidize private education and school choice, charter schools and others, they cannot exclude religious schools from receiving those funds simply because they are religious. This is John Roberts. I pray that he sticks to his guns and he doesn't flip-flop on this because of political pressure. He's probably the deciding vote on the Supreme Court as we sit here right now. Here's more of what he said. The Constitution's free exercise clause protects people who are religious from being treated unequally, as well as from laws that discriminate based on religion. He goes on. And it was 3 years ago in the Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer and Roberts. Excuse me. It was the case of Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer. I think it was 3 years ago. My numbers may be off there. It doesn't matter. Roberts explained in his majority ruling on that case that the court distilled its decision interpreting the free exercise clause into the unremarkable conclusion that when the government denies an otherwise available benefit solely because of the would-be recipient's religious nature, the denial is subject to the most stringent standard of constitutional review, known as strict scrutiny. In other words, and I think you already understand it. In other words, if you've got a benefit that's being offered to all applicants, if the government is going to issue a contract to construct a road, for example, you can't eliminate an organization from being considered for that award, for that contract, simply because it's owned and operated by Christians or Jews, and part of their mission statement in their advertising and their public persona is their faith. You can't say, oh, no, we're not going to give that bridge contract to that Jewish organization because it would violate the the separation of church and state. It would breach the wall of separation if we did so. You can't do that. Well, that makes sense when it comes to a bridge. But what about other things like uh, the business of education? If you've got a benefit that is funded by your tax dollars. Again, the government doesn't just create money out of thin air, at least it shouldn't. That would be called monopoly money, which would be worthless. Where does the government get its wealth? It gets it from you. It taxes you and me, and there should be no taxation without representation, which means we have a voice in how that money should be spent. It's our money. And in state and state across the nation, the issue of school choice has undergone constitutional review. And basically, it boils down to this. If you're, like I said at the beginning of the show, if your local schools are failing and you want to choose to send your child to a school that's better, you should be able to take your tax dollars with you to that subsequent school, to the better school, the one that you like and you think will do a better job for the needs of your kid. It's letting the customer decide where the child will be educated rather than trusting Big Brother to impose that decision on local communities and individuals. So we've already made these decisions across the nation that school choice is a good thing. And you can see the data. It's replete. It's out there everywhere. That school choice elevates student performance. It doesn't hurt it. It helps poor communities. It doesn't jeopardize them. It doesn't hurt them. If you live in an urban community in Oklahoma City or Tulsa that's failing and the schools are crappy and lousy and everybody and their brother knows it, you can see the test scores. You can see the performance is awful. Nobody's reading at grade level. Nobody's doing math at grade level. Nobody's succeeding. Discipline is non-existent. It's chaos. And you're a good parent and you want to get your kid out of that situation. And St. Isidore's has an opportunity for you to take your tax dollars and get a decent education for your kid. You're not Catholic. You don't care about that. But you do like the fact that St. Isidore's teaches math, teaches writing, teaches reading, is focused on virtue rather than vice. And you're going to send your kid there because they've got a 100% graduation rate and 98% of their matriculants, their graduates, actually go to college. Thinking this is a good thing. I can send my kid to St. Isidore's. Grantner Drummond says, no, you can't do that because I'm going to protect your religious freedom and tell you, no, that's not a choice that's on the table for you. Some people might say, well, let them pay for it. They don't have the money to pay for it themselves. They've already paid for it via their taxes. It would be like having a government-run grocery store that has empty shelves and nothing but crappy food, processed food, laden with carcinogens. The government says that's your government store. You can only use your food stamps, your government subsidy to shop at that government-run store. You can't use your food stamps to go to the grocer across the street who has healthy food, fruit, fresh meat, produce. You can't use your food stamps to go over there because that grocery store is it's owned by a Christian, and their marketing is overtly Christian. And you can't even use those food stamps to go to a Christian-run food bank. You can't use it over there because it violates the wall of separation of church and state. Does this sound crazy? It's nuts. It's not conservative. It's not constitutional. It's the wrong, progressive, liberal, left-wing understanding of the separation of church and state and this metaphorical wall that Thomas Jefferson spoke. It's ignorant of history, and it's ignorant of the decisions that the Supreme Court, the sitting Supreme Court of the United States under Chief Justice John Roberts, it's inconsistent and ignorant of the decisions they've already made. You can't do this. States are not required to subsidize private education, says Chief Justice John Roberts. But if they opt to do so, he says, they cannot exclude schools from receiving those funds simply because they are religious. Close quote. End of story. So I'm going to end this show with asking you a rhetorical question. When are we going to learn? When are we going to learn to do a little research, understand our history, and recognize when we're being lied to? When somebody tells us, oh, I'm all about your religious freedom, so I'm going to sue all the way to the Supreme Court to stop religious people from choosing a college that's more religious rather than less as the choice to educate their children. I'm going to stop you from doing so because I'm for your religious freedom, and there should be a wall stopping you from doing that. Does that sound like somebody who really has your best interest at heart? Does it? Does that sound like somebody who actually believes in your religious liberty? Does it? Or does it sound like somebody who doesn't understand you and doesn't care and is going to side with the liberal whack jobs on the Supreme Court rather than the conservatives who are actually trying to protect your personal rights, trying to protect your children from a terrible product called broken schools? And even when you have a school that's proven itself to be the better option, nope, says Gentner Drummond, can't go there unless you're wealthy like me and you can afford to pay for it over and above what you've already paid in your taxes. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion.